Hello, students. Welcome to English class. First, we'll recollect the previous part of the lesson collectors. Teachers and students had been on an adventurous walk and it was raining heavily. At last, they found a house. Mr. and Mrs. Brown were the occupants. Teachers were given with the tea and children made to sit in the kitchen. They were surprised to see the empty kitchen. Children noticed strange features in Mrs. Brown. Pete found that the teachers were drugged. Pete and Glenn tried to break the glass and windows, but it was burglar proof. Mr. and Mrs. Brown were hissing and clicking. Children, being suspicious, open the cupboard and find various types of electronic equipments. Carol pleads Mrs. Brown to let them go. Mrs. Brown compels them to drink orange juice. Mr. and Mrs. Brown reveal that they are aliens and they are taking children to their home planet for experiment and scientific study. Open your textbook, children, and refer as I read. Flinging the cupboard door open, Pete holds up the walking stick, two-handed. Come one step nearer, and I smash this equipment. Mr. Brown. No! Mrs. Brown. Do nothing yet. Too dangerous. Pete. Grab a chair, Glenn. Come over here. If they so much as move, smash all this. Glenn. Right. He joins Pete with the chair raised and ready. Mr. Brown. Smash any part of those panels and you will kill us all. Pete. I'll take that chance, Carol. You and the rest get near that outer door. Carol. Yes, come on, you lot, quick. All the children, except Pete and Glenn, cluster against the door to the outside. Mr. Brown. They are only children. We can rush them. Attack. Mrs. Brown. No, they are wild. Keep still. Mr. Brown. We can't let this happen. Beaten by inferior creatures. Mrs. Brown. We must. If they break any part of this equipment, we are stranded here on Earth. We can do no repairs here. Pete, you go and bring Mr. Hunt and the others out here. Mr. Brown, no. Pete taps the panel with a stick and swings it back for a real blow. Mrs. Brown, go and fetch them. Mr. Brown goes out. Pete, you, how do we open the back door and the door in the porch? Mrs. Brown, yes, all right. It's that control down there on the left. It's marked with a yellow light. Press it. Glenn, don't trust her, Pete. Pete, I won't. Listen, if those doors don't open at once, Glenn and I start wrecking. Words which we have come across. First one, stranded, which means trapped. Second one, porch, which means covered entrance. Third one, wreck, which means break forcefully. Last one, cluster, which means to gather. Moving on towards the explanation. Pete moves towards the cupboard with a walking stick to smash the electronic equipments. Browns were frightened by this act of Pete. Pete calls upon Glenn to come up with a chair to smash the panels if Mr. and Mrs. Brown attack. Mr. Brown warns if the panels are damaged, everybody would be killed. Pete casually says that he is ready to take a chance and asks Carol and rest of them to move towards the outer door. All children except Pete and Glenn move towards the outer door. When Mr. Brown was ready to attack, Mrs. Brown prevents him, saying that if the spaceship gets damaged, they would be trapped on Earth and forces Mr. Brown to fetch the teachers to the kitchen. Pete inquires about the switch to open the back doors, for which Mrs. Brown tells that the control down on the left, marked with a yellow light, has to be pressed to open the door. Glenn suspects and asks Pete not to believe in the words of Mrs. Brown. But Pete says that, like, if the doors don't open, they would start wrecking all the panels. Moving on to the next part of the lesson. Mrs. Brown, I'm telling the truth. Press the control. Press it. Pete, watch her, Glenn. And if this is a trick, use that chair. Glenn, don't you worry, mate. Pete presses the control and the doors open. Carol, it's all right, Pete. It worked. Mr. Hunt, Miss Swan, and Mrs. Jones stagger dazedly into the room. Mr. Brown is behind them. Pete, help them. Get them outside and well away from the house. Wade, what about you? Pete, don't worry, get going. The children help the adults out through the back door, leaving Pete and Glenn facing Mr. and Mrs. Brown. Glenn, what now, Pete? They'll grab us as we run for it. Pete, no, they won't. I've got a plan. You go first. Glenn, not without you. Mrs. Brown, we underestimated these creatures. They were never so fierce before. Mr. Brown, they were all drugged before. Pete, go through the other door behind you and close it. Mr. Brown, and if we refuse, Pete, you will be very sorry. He taps the panel again with the stick. Mrs. Brown, do as he says quickly. We have no choice. The two aliens go out and close the door behind them. Pete, run for it, Glenn. Now, Glenn. Right. Glenn and Pete dash for the back door and disappear through it. Scene. Moorland a little later. The whole party are sitting on the grass. It's neither raining nor foggy. The sun is out. Pete presses the yellow button and the door opens. At the same time, Mr. Brown brings all the teachers to the kitchen. Pete asks Carol and Wayne to take all of them out. Wayne was worried about Pete and Glenn. Mrs. Brown regrets that they had underestimated these creatures because they had never experienced such a type of an attack from any other creatures earlier. For which Mr. Brown clarifies that they were drugged, but in this case, children were not ready to drink the orange juice and were not drugged. Pete asks Brown to go to the other room and close it for Mr. Brown refuses. Pete taps the panel with a stick. Mrs. Brown realizes the danger and both of them go out and close the door. Pete and Glenn rush through the back door. Next scene, Moorland. All are out of danger and are sitting on the grass in a moorland. Mrs. Jones is still in a trauma. Moving on to the last part of the lesson. Carol, but you remember being drugged, miss, don't you? Don, and all our anoraks were left in that house spaceship thing. Glenn, and the house isn't there anymore. Pete, just vanished in a soundless flash. Miss Swan, I know, but it's mad. It's incredible. Mr. Hunt, we have to report it. Miss Swan, don't be silly. How can we? It'll sound utter nonsense. Mr. Hunt, people disappear. Maybe they were collected as we were. Surely we have got to tell the story, believable or not, as a warning. Wait, it'll sound crazy. Tracy, I don't want people thinking I'm potty. Mrs. Jones, I agree. Say nothing. Mr. Hunt, I don't know. Swear everybody to secrecy. Anyway, I'm cold. Let's get on down to the village. Talk it over as we go. The party moves off, arguing. Two difficult words which we come across are anoraks which means a waterproof jacket, typically with a hood. Second one, potty, which means foolish. Carol asked teacher about being drugged, but Don was worried about anoraks which were left in the porch. Glenn and Pete say that the house had taken the form of a spaceship and vanished in a fraction of a second. Mr. Hunt wanted to report to police, but Miss Swan resists by saying that no one would believe them. Mr. Hunt wanted to report as a warning to other people as a precautionary method. Tracy was not ready to tell anything to others because she was afraid that people would think that she was foolish. Mr. Hunt also agrees at last to keep it as a secret and they move towards the village arguing. I hope you have all enjoyed the story, children, isn't it? Now it's the time for the assignment. Answer these two simple questions. First one, which color button was pressed by Pete to open the back door? Second, what was left in the spaceship? Thank you. Have a nice day, children.